shall perish.
Think you can get away?
The Temple of Wisdom. This may hurt a little.
Greetings everyone, welcome back to another episode of Team Comp Tuesday, the series where every Tuesday we take a look at a different team, whether it's a for fun team or it's a meta team. This week we have the release of Nahida, which is in part why this episode was delayed by a couple days, so we could have a for fun Nahida team. Also, I apologize for the lack of an episode last week. I was sick and I also had a lot of family stuff come up, so I wasn't able to get a episode recorded last week, but we still got plenty of episodes to go. Series ain't going nowhere. And we have Nahida finally, so probably a lot of Dendro teams coming up. But with the coming of the 4th Archon, we finally have it. We finally have the whole Archon team. The 4 Archon team, which I'm excited to show off. Listen, it's not the best team, but it's a team we've been waiting for, and it's pretty fun. So let's get into it. So, the real question is, now that we have all 4 of these Archons, how do we put them together in a way that's good? Well, the team that I think is probably the way to go, and the one I've been messing around with, is sort of a on-field Nahida kind of team. There are kind of 2 directions you can take Raiden. Raiden is really the main flexible unit in this team. And we kind of have 2 options between like an actual damage Raiden and a full EM Raiden. I think full EM Raiden is probably the way to go with on-field Nahida. But you definitely could play a normal Raiden, at least, you know, if you want to use her sword, that's fun, all that kind of stuff. So maybe there's actually a reason to use on-field Raiden, but we are going to also briefly discuss EM Raiden in this video, since EM Raiden is probably going to be important to a lot of Nahida's teams going forward, and I probably would honestly recommend building it if you don't have a full EM set for Raiden. I'm definitely going to be working on mine over the past couple weeks after I finish building up Nahida. Alright, so first up here we're going to talk about character builds. Both Raiden and Nahida have a little bit of variance in their builds, depending on whether you want to play Nahida as the on-field, like shown in the first example, or Raiden as the on-field, as shown in the second example. Both teams have their up and downs. Nahida's a little bit more consistent, or Raiden a little bit more burst-focused. Kind of just whichever one you prefer to be your on-field unit, I think make your on-field unit. And they have slightly different builds. Also, my Nahida is not fully built right now. She just came out, so this team will get better, and it's a pretty good team. So I think first things first, we talk weapons. So anything with high EM is kind of the way I would take this. If you're going to on-field, you do have the option to opt into a crit style weapon. Something like the Withstith here, or a 5-star book if you have it. 5-star damage book is perfectly fine here for the on-field variant of this team, since Nahida's normal attacks will be contributing a decent chunk of her damage. But definitely for the off-field, having EM is a bit better. Options include sack frags, Mapamare, or even the 3-star magic... Or is it magic guide? Yeah, magic guide all the way down here. This is actually a pretty good 3-star option if you want to use it. My personal recommendation is if you have sack frags, just use sack frags, unless you need it for another character. But like a lot of teams, you know, Sucrose teams or whatever, Sucrose can just be put on Thrilling Tales or something. So you can run sack frags on Nahida. If you do want to use her as the on-field, you can run, like I said, one of those damage books, but since I like to not have to swap her builds whatsoever or anything like that, just chucking her on sack frags is really nice for me. Same thing with artifacts. You kind of have 2 ways to build her. You can either build full EM, or you can build crit standard DPS style with an EM Sans for on-field. Or you can actually even go attack Sans if she isn't going to be the one triggering like Bloom or something in Hyper Bloom. So Nahida actually has a couple different builds. But again, I like to go just a build that'll work on every setup, work okay, and then tweak if I have to. So I personally am running EM on Sands, a Dendro Goblet on that, and a crit rate helmet. Also important to note, whatever you have better stats on probably will be better. So if like me, EMPs are a little bit more rare. So if like me, you have pretty good damage pieces, just run damage instead. The Steepwood is her best set as it does lower Dendro res. It's essentially a Nemo or VV for Dendro characters. Now for her talents, her main talent that does a lot of her damage is her E. This kind of like marks enemies, then every time you hit them with a Dendro reaction, it does Dendro damage to them, reapplying Dendro. So this is the main skill you need to level, but ideally you want to level this and her burst, and if you plan to play her on field, leveling up her normal attack is not a bad idea. It doesn't have insane scaling, so it's not going to make the biggest difference, but definitely this E is your main priority, and her ultimate is also a pretty good thing to level up as well. Alright, now next we're going to talk about Raiden again. Two variants of Raiden, on-field standard style or off-field full EM. We're going to go over the differences in each build. Generally, you just run the opposite of whatever your Nahida is. If you want your Nahida to be your on-fielder, run Raiden as full EM. If you want Nahida to be your off-fielder, run Raiden full damage. This isn't full EM Raiden isn't really a meme. It's actually very good with Nahida, and we'll probably see it in other Nahida teams. So don't feel like you're building full EM Raiden just for this kind of meme build. If it is actually probably going to be meta viable as well on top of that. But let's start damage Raiden because damage Raiden is the easiest to understand. Catch best weapon, engulfing lightning actually is best, but catch if you can spare it. Any 5-star is fine. Something like deathmatch would be fine as well. Just basically any kind of stat stick for crit and that kind of stuff. For I didn't fully swap her set, but for wow, so she wasn't as powerful as she could have been in that showcase. But for gear, you want a 4-piece emblem for your on-field Raidens, with either attack or ER on Sands, depending on what you have better of, electro damage Goblet, and then crit rate or crit damage on the Circlet. Talents, E and Ultimate are the important ones, but for DPS, Raiden, her normal attack doesn't really matter because the normal attack multipliers for her burst are actually in her burst, so you can just level the burst. Now let's quickly talk about the full EM build instead. Full EM build, I need to finish leveling it up, but Dragon's Bane is ideally your weapon of choice. Kitten Cross Spear is okay, but this is by far your best option as it has a very high Elemental Mastery substat. I think it's something like 224 at max, and is just a good stat stick. For artifacts, your options are you want EM on Circlet, EM on Sands, EM on Goblet, and then you want, ideally, you want a full set of the Gilded Dreams set, as this will give you an attack buff and an elemental mastery buff for the members of a different element type in your party. So this ends up being, if you're in a comp like this that has 3 different ones, this would be something like an extra 150 buff. If you don't have it because you haven't been lucky enough to get EM pieces of this set like me, then you alternatively can opt for a 2-piece Wanderer's Troop with that to just get another 80 flat from this 2-piece. And for EM Raiden, the only thing you care about is her E, as that's basically the only use for her.
You are not welcome here.
Okay, so unlike Raiden and Nahida, whose builds are kind of different depending on which one you want to be your on-field and off-fielder, Venti and Zhongli's builds will be very much the same regardless of who you play. This team actually does have some decent synergy, because you can get damage buff and shred from Zhongli, as well as damage buff and shred from Venti and grouping. Again, this isn't meant to be a super strong build, it's just funny that now we have an all-Archon team. It actually does have a degree of synergy. It's a pretty okay What quicken team. I think honestly, if you want to make this team a little better and still run as many Archons as possible, you could probably like drop Zhongli and add Fischl or something. But we're going with the full Archons for the memes and the dankness. Weapons for Venti. Stringless is generally the weapon most people use and tend to be what I prefer as well. Elemental Mastery, good for swirling. And the passive on it is just very strong, especially at high refines. DPS bows are also fine. Stuff like Skyward Harp is perfectly usable. And if you have nothing else, stuff like Favonius Warbow is also a perfectly fine option to give energy to other teammates. For artifacts, it's pretty easy, very standard in emo setup. VV, full EM, EM hat, EM goblet, EM sands, as much ER as you can, maybe a little bit of crit if you have Favonius, very standard stuff using the VV, so the Electro can hit as hard as humanly possible. For skills, Burst and Ultimate can be leveled up about the same. You don't need normal attack. A side note is that if you have God tier, like really good artifacts, you actually can opt for DPS artifacts instead of full EM, especially because Nahida will also give you an EM buff through her passive, but I still just think generally full EM on your Anemo characters that are mainly based around swirl damage, the way to go. So that's how I would build Venti. Alright, last and certainly not least is Zhongli, which actually does bring some buffs to the team that are nice. And he isn't too bad. Weapons, two options here, a couple options actually. You could opt for DPS Zhongli and cast Meteor, but personally Meteor is generally DPS loss. So I tend to not go too hard on DPS and just keep that shield up so Raiden can do her thing in her bursts and stuff like that. And so Nahida is safe while casting her E on tons of enemies. So Black Tassel, nice 3-star option, HP substat, pretty good. Homa, if you really want to go crazy with this team, you could run Homa. That would be pretty good on Zhongli in this kind of setup. Deathmatch is also a perfectly fine option. Favonius is also fine as well, giving energy to Raiden, as well as the other units in the team. Just remember, if you're going to use Favonius, to build some amount of crit rate on him so that you can actually crit. Artifacts, you have two main options. Tenacity is generally the way you want to go for artifact set, but for stats you can either go full HP or you can go hybrid. I generally go the way I tend to do is I tend to go hybrid if I'm gonna run Black Tassel. Also, I just mainly have my Zhongli built for my Zhao and Sino teams, so I have him built kind of as a hybrid. But HP on Sands almost all the time. And then Goblet, you have the options between HP and Geo damage bonus, and Circlet, either crit rate, a crit stat or HP, kind of depending on what you want. I tend to go for crit, just because sometimes I like to press Meteor, and Meteor make big stuff go boom, and especially in a for fun team like this, having the Meteor just crit a little bit more often is fine. Also, crit rate gets a little bit more value if you're running the Favonius Lance. You actually need the energy on other characters. Alright, and now we're on to the sample rotation. I'm going to be using the on-field Raiden version, as my Nahida is still a little bit underbuilt, underleveled, so her on-field isn't going to be quite as good. Also, I just really like Raiden's attacks and animations, so I prefer to on-field her, but this is not a meta team by any stretch of the imagination, so please just use whichever one you prefer. So, let's get to it. Yes, let's fight. So, I like to start with Raiden E into Venti stuff, then you lay the Nahida burst, use the hold, Raiden burst, and then you just start slashing. Standard Raiden combos, N3C, times 5, and to N1C again. And then just cycle back through stuff, cast your skills, running Zhongli burst and downtime if you want to. And yeah, that went pretty fast, you know. My characters are pretty well built, but as you can see, this team, not too shabby. Not too shabby for the all Archon for fun team. I'm still a little sad that Nahida doesn't have a glowing piece of her hair. I mean, come on. You got that. All three of the others have a piece of their hair that glows whenever after they like burst or something like that. Nahida doesn't. Little sag. But Nahida is looking like a lot of fun. I'm really enjoying this character. I think she's great. I love her passive. I definitely think if you have the primos and you ever think you're going to play a Dendro team, she's worth the pickup. And totally expect the next couple weeks to probably be Nahida style teams, or maybe only next week. I'm not exactly sure how many Nahida teams we're going to do. But I want to thank you for watching. And I hope you have a great day, and I wish you luck on your Nahida pools and your other wishing endeavors if you want. Who else is on it? Yoimiya, if she'd prefer to have her. Oh, also, yeah, I don't think you need to get... I personally... This is a little tangent, a little off point, but I personally would not go for this. Like, this is a fine, and it's a pretty okay buff, and, like, it is obviously her signature weapon, and it's pretty good. But considering she's kind of, like... You're probably going to be using her as an off-field support in like 99% of our teams. You're probably better off saving your primos for like a hypercarry weapon, or like... It's also not a very generic weapon, and stuff like sack frags will get the job done perfectly fine. And if you want to play DPS Nahida, there's probably honestly better options. But I want to thank you for coming out again, and I hope you have a great day.